So, Nazaray was nerfed. Is it useless now, or is it still overpowered? Hey there, I'm FakeFox, and in this video I will give you a detailed analysis of the Nazaray monster set and my opinion on how good it really is. Nazaray is a new monster set for the Ascending Tide DLC. Players quickly realized that the PTS Week 1 version was ridiculously overpowered, so the set was changed for PTS Week 2. Previously, Nazaray increased the duration of damage over time effects, major and minor debuffs, when using an ultimate, based on the spent ultimate points. This was now changed to no longer work for damage over time. The cooldown was also increased to 30 seconds up from 20, but the conversion rate was actually buffed to 1 second for every 20 ultimate spent, down from 25. So how good is this new version of Nazaray? For my analysis, I will only focus on PvE. So 1 second for every 20 ultimate means with 500 ultimate everything gets extended by 25 seconds. And if we're looking at a more realistic use of support ultimates like Warren or Colossus, it's about 10 to 15 seconds per cast. But which effect would we even want to extend? Well, here's a list of all major and minor debuffs. Some are only relevant in PvP, so they're out. Many can easily be kept up permanently anyway, so they're also out. Of the remaining 4, 2 increase our damage and 2 decrease our damage taken. I'm not going to say Major Maim and Cowardice are useless, but I think their impact as a whole is minimal at the moment. Both effects currently see very little practical use. With how incoming damage is calculated in PvE, the effects aren't that strong, and short durations lead to very few relevant use cases. But with a duration increase by up to 25 seconds, I think this could actually change, at least to some degree. I highly doubt we will see high-end groups utilizing it, but this could be very interesting for weaker groups. Lower DPS often leads to difficult situations lasting longer and becoming more dangerous, and this is exactly where the longer duration could really help. Take for example the last group before Balsai in Rockgrove. For a good group, this fight takes under 10 seconds and doesn't require that much damage mitigation, as most mechanics just don't even happen. For lower DPS groups, this fight might take more like 30 seconds, with constant high incoming damage, as all mechanics actually happen. And it becomes a really dangerous encounter. A Nova doesn't really help, because the Major Maim only lasts 8 seconds. But if the Major Maim suddenly lasts over 30 seconds, it can become a real game changer. So I think Major Maim and Cowardice could become a lot more interesting with Nazaray, but the really interesting effects are Major Vulnerability and Major Brittle. And one more thing before we continue, Nazaray can not be applied with the same ultimate that applies the debuff that you want to extend, because the debuff already needs to be on the target when Nazaray is triggered. So for example, if you want to extend the Major Vulnerability from a Colossus, the Necromancer cannot wear Nazaray. Another player needs to wear it and use an ultimate after the Colossus was already used. Continuing with Major Vulnerability, Colossus gives 12 seconds of Major Vulnerability, but as the 3 slams refresh the duration every time, it's actually more like 14 seconds. A second support player, probably with a Warhorn, could then increase the duration to a total of 39 seconds with 500 ultimate. This player could also wear sets like Saxhleel Champion or Master Architect to get more value out of the 500 ultimate. First of all, this would be incredibly strong for a 40-second burst window, but you would of course sacrifice some damage beforehand by saving up to the full ultimate. But we can take this even further. With high enough ultigen, we only need 1 player with Colossus and 2 players, maybe 3 with Nazaray, alternating ultimates for 100% Major Vulnerability uptime. And we would also increase the duration of other buffs in the process, maybe even including Major Maim, Cowardice and Brittle. The more effects we have on the target, the more efficient Nazaray becomes. I still don't see groups attempting 100% uptimes of defensive debuffs though, as someone also has to use those defensive sets or ultimate, sacrificing quite a bit of damage. So what about Major Brittle then? This debuff will also be new with Ascending Tide. It will come from another new monster set, Noon Attack. Currently this set does not really work in PvE, as it cannot apply Major Brittle to CC immune targets, and all larger enemies and bosses are CC immune. For the sake of argument, let's just assume this will be changed. Major Brittle increases the critical damage, so it counts towards the critical damage cap. The critical damage cap is quite easy to reach in trial groups at the moment, so the condition for critical damage buffs to be worthwhile is a high uptime. Major Brittle is the strongest critical damage buff available, but the uptime that Noon Attack can achieve is pretty bad with only about 26%. With Nazaray, the duration could get to 29 seconds, so 1 second short of the 30-second cooldown, so almost 100% uptime would theoretically be possible. But now to the real question. Can we permanently keep up Major Vulnerability and Major Brittle at the same time? Well, Major Brittle is the shortest and least controllable factor, so everything would need to be timed around it. This gets kind of complicated, so here's a graphic. Basically, because Major Vulnerability lasts longer than Major Brittle, we would need to use Nazaray every third proc of Noon Attack, so about every 36 seconds. And that is where another interesting thing about Nazaray comes into play. The set can actually affect the same buff more than once, if it lasts longer than the cooldown. In this theoretical timeline, we can actually extend the same Colossus cast 2 times and only need 1 Colossus about every minute. So the Necromancer wouldn't even need that much ultigen. And there you have it, almost 100% uptime of Major Vulnerability and Major Brittle is theoretically possible with 1 player with Colossus, 1 player wearing Noon Attack, and 2 players or maybe 3 with high ultigen wearing Nazaray. The same thing could also work with Turning Tide, a new dungeon set that also is a Major Vulnerability source. It would certainly not be the easiest thing to coordinate, but a good raid leader with buff trackers and ulti share could certainly do it. The question is then if it's even worth it for all the other buff sets and ultimates you give up. I think it might be, but given that these sets even go live like that in the first place, it will still take groups some time to figure out how it really works. But anyways, this was more of a thought experiment to show what could be possible. To sum it up, the nerfed version of Nazaray is still extremely strong. Maybe still too strong, but that's up for debate, I guess. I don't think it is particularly amazing for 4-player content, outside of niche cases maybe, as there just aren't enough players and effects in a group to make it worthwhile. In trial groups, however, it is very powerful for short burst encounters between 25 to 45 seconds, I would say, and potentially also for longer fights if managed correctly. So that's it for this video. I saw a lot of different opinions going around from totally broken to totally useless, so I thought it would be a good idea to present a bit of theory crafting on the topic. Hope you enjoyed it and thanks for watching. See you!